Well, this week I was in Washington, D.C. at the Christians United for Israel Summit, and I spoke to Congressman Mark Meadows there about a number of issues, including Iran and the increased pressure from the U.S. on the Islamic Republic. Let's take a listen.
Well, I think it's been a consistent approach is that America will not be bullied. We, from a foreign policy standpoint, we're going to stand by our allies, and in this particular case is the nation of Israel. But it's not just that. It is sending a very clear message that if they want to negotiate and be partners where they talk about a real Iran nuclear deal that actually keeps them from having nuclear capability, then we're willing to talk. And in the same time, we're not going to sit around and suggest that threats will go unanswered.
Do you see a scenario anytime soon where Iran does come back to the negotiating table? It's going to take a while for these sanctions to kick in.
It could. And sanctions not only are a crude tool, they're not necessarily the most effective. And certainly when we're talking about just U.S. sanctions, the whole economy there is really one that is dictated more by what happens with EU sanctions. We realize that they're not a partner with us in doing what I guess Secretary Kerry said was a snapback. But we knew then it was not going to happen, and so what we have to do is make sure that our resolve is clearly articulated. I think the President has done that, and yet at the same time, no one wants a war. But I do believe in this particular case that I've been one of the few members of Congress who's actually met with Foreign Minister Zarif and had lengthy discussions with him when we were negotiating the original deal, and they need to understand the resolve of the American people. So it doesn't go from administration to administration. It's really about the American people, and tolerating a nuclear capable Iran is something that most Americans will not support.
The original threat coming from President Rouhani about the mother of all wars, that was in response to Secretary of State Pompeo attending an Iranian resistance summit.
Right.
Do you think that the approach here is to foment regime change, possibly through the sanctions leading to a crippling economy? Is that the strategy?
No, I don't know if it's as much that. Obviously, Secretary Pompeo is a very thoughtful individual, and so nothing that he does is done without a plan. And I had the privilege of serving in Congress with the Secretary, and back then we called him Mike. Now he's got an elevated title, but he does everything really with a plan. But it's not as much about a regime change in terms of personnel, but a regime change in terms of their thought process and their willingness to either be part of an international community or not. Because right now they're becoming isolated, and I think that should send a very clear message. If you're willing to be a responsible international partner, then you will be received with open arms. We're starting to see that even now with North Korea, is that if you're willing to engage, we're willing to really negotiate in good faith.
Secretary of State Pompeo, Mike, as you guys used to call him, he has been supporting this, but do you think that beyond tweets or words of encouragement, that the U.S. should take a more active role in supporting some kind of regime change?
Well, I think that any time that we tried to get involved in regime changes, it historically has not worked out real well. It's generally left up to creating an environment where the Iranian people in this particular situation, where hopefully they can rise up and say that we want a government, and as you know, in Iran there is a huge resistance movement, but that resistance movement is more about wanting a government that can be more, what I would say, mainstreamed into the international community, and yet at the same time, oppressive governments, a lot of times have a very chilling effect on that democracy, freedom-loving individual. And so it's making sure that their voice is heard, and yet perhaps not being intricately involved in the actual change of government.
How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think what happens is that as people start to see what is a available to them in other countries, and unemployment being so great in Iran and in a number of Middle Eastern countries. When you look, the most prosperous nations generally are those that are the most free, and when we look at it from that perspective, that new generation of citizen will demand it, and as long as those are not thwarted and oppressed, then I believe that freedom normally will serve a good cause.